The topic today is chaos. And I sort of think that when we talk about chaos, we usually refer to something changing, some things are shifting. And what we usually hear is this saying that the only thing permanent in life is change. But also, I think, in my work as a coach, what I tend to see often is that we also keep forgetting that it's permanent. I think it's kind of one of life's paradoxes that we're born into this world of constant change, and yet we as humans, we really have a low tolerance for change, and often see it as a threat. We would more, like to keep things as they are and navigate through a life without chaos. Of course, usually change comes gradually so that we have time to adapt to it. I mean, if we think about all of us here, we haven't had two similar days in our lives, but we just don't realize it really. We don't think about it that way. But then come the times of big, chaotic changes that don't ask for permission, that don't ask if you're ready for it or not. And that's exactly what happened to me roughly 10 years ago. Back then I was living and working in Mexico City, which is funny because this chaos theme was chosen by Tijuana from Mexican peers. So I was living and working in Mexico City, and it had been a busy day at work. And I was already late for my own birthday dinner, actually. So I had called a taxi, and I was waiting there on the sidewalk for the taxi to arrive and pick me up. But that never happened because I was hit by an airplane. And it's funny, but I remember pretty much everything from this instant. You don't have to read the small text. It's really small and tiny, but I'll tell you what happened. I remember how I saw the plane, and I thought that's flying really low. I remember when I realized that it's coming right at me, right this way, and there was no time really to do anything else except turn around. I remember how the plane crashed about 20-30 meters away from me. I even remember the pressure wave from the explosion when it threw me on the ground. I remember flying in the air, which was probably 1 second, but felt like 10. And at that moment, I remember thinking that this is it. This is how I die. As you can see, I didn't die. But I came to my senses just a few seconds later. I was lying face down on the ground, and I felt some smaller pieces of metal dropping on my back, probably from the plane or from the cars that were around me exploding. And I remember I heard this kind of a voice in my head saying that you need to get up now if you're ever going to get up. So I got up and started walking away from the scene of the accident. Actually, I was lying pretty much over here. I don't know if you can see, but there's a guy standing here. And I was just when I was putting these slides together, I started looking at this really closely, and there's this column, this pillar, and I'm pretty sure that probably saved my life. So talk about good luck, having fallen right there. And I started walking this way and crying for help, and then finally I was taken to a hospital, to the emergency room. That's where I passed out again. And I woke up the following day in an intensive care unit. I was covered in bandages from head to toe and also intubated, so I wasn't able to speak. But of course I realized that this was pretty bad, that I had been injured really badly. But at that point, I think it was probably my mind that was protecting me. And also I had no point of reference. I didn't know what it means to have like deep third-degree burns. What kind of a process is that? So I thought that, I'm going to be here for a few weeks, and then I would get back to my life the way it was, go back to work and continue with my life. But the thing was, what I didn't realize at that point was that life didn't exist anymore. There was no way to return to that life. Because before the accident, when I would, look in the mirror, I would see a woman looking pretty much like this. Not with that hat though, not every day. It's what taken at my friend's wedding in Mexico. But the first time when I looked in the mirror after the accident, I saw this. I didn't recognize myself. It's a total stranger, with no familiar features, and just this blank stare from having had morphine for 2 months, IV. And it was something that I wasn't prepared for. I was totally devastated. At that point, I started realizing that this is going to be a long way, both physically and emotionally, because I had to start everything anew. I had to learn how to walk again, had to learn how to use a fork, how to get dressed, everything. I had burned 40% of my body, out of which roughly 25% were deep second-degree and third-degree burns that needed skin grafts and surgeries. So far I've had 22 surgeries to date, and there's still some more to come. I lost my job, and I lost my marriage. Now, when you lose pretty much everything you have in your life, when it's all shattered in pieces, where do you start to rebuild it? How do you create something new out of something better out of chaos? Usually when I share my story, I hear comments saying that, oh, you're so amazing, you're so brave, your attitude is so positive, and if it was me, I wouldn't have made it. But you see, that's what I would have said before. If somebody had told me what was in store for me, what kind of a curveball life had for me, that's what I would have thought. I would not make it. And that's why I think that it's a shame that usually these survival stories that we hear, what I shared, usually tell this narrative of the superhero survivor who has some positive attitude or some other superpowers that we normal people don't have, and how they just meet whatever challenge they have, they just go for it. Whereas that's rarely the whole story. There's always ups and downs and curves and bumps along the road. And we just try to survive in one way or another, because we're all challenged in life at some point. And I think the will to survive is just some kind of a default setting in us humans. We have this will to survive no matter what it is that the adversities that we face. But I think the way we survive depends more on the survival mechanisms that we have at hand or that we're able to reach for. I mean, talking about your trauma is a survival mechanism, but so is drinking. But as you can see, those different methods, they lead to very different kinds of results. When we take a closer look at our emotional status, it seems that it's sort of dependent on the external circumstances of our life. We tend to react to our surroundings, but we don't have to. You see, when my life was suddenly shrunk into the size of a hospital bed, I realized that, lying in that same bed, in that very same room, in the very same surroundings and circumstances, at one moment I could feel joy and gratitude, about having still my sight left or being able to train to walk again. And in the next moment, I could feel sorrow, despair, fear for the future. So my emotions weren't that much actually dependent on the circumstances, but in my inner state of mind. And this is actually where I think the story, survival story, turns into a story about growth, not just surviving. Because we cannot always choose the circumstances we're in, but we can choose how we act. And that has an impact in the quality of life and how we recover from chaos. I think there's one thing, though, that sort of connects all these survival stories or growth stories, and that's hope. And we often tend to think of hope as this kind of a feel-good emotion, but actually, hope is a dynamic, cognitive, motivational system where emotions follow cognition and not the other way around. In the midst of any adversities, the more hopeful you can be about your future, the more doors you can see to be open or pathways that lead towards forward in your life, the more likely you are able to survive and experience growth. The late psychologist Charles Richard Snyder actually dedicated his whole life in studying the element of hope. And he found out that there are 3 elements that make this, or that this element consists of. The first one is this kind of a goal-directed thinking, that we're able to set goals that are valuable and maybe uncertain, but they're kind of the anchors of our hope. And they provide this kind of an end point to our hopeful thinking. When we're being hopeful, we set ourselves realistic goals. You know, we know where we want to go. For me, it was getting back in shape so I could return to my life, to back to work, lead an independent life. And on the really dark days, it was just to endure until the end of that day. The second element of hope is that of grit or perseverance. When we think about concrete routes that might lead to our goals that we want to achieve, when we're motivated to give it some effort and also motivated to endure the disappointments and then get back up again and continue, maybe pursue a different route, maybe redefine our goal, but not giving up. You know, I didn't go back to work in Mexico. I stayed in Helsinki. It didn't take me 6 months of sick leave as I first optimistically thought. It took me 18 months. So it was all the time redefining my goal, but not giving up. And the third element is believing in yourself. And I think this is the crucial one, because without this, the first 2, they don't really matter that much if you don't believe that you can do it. And this is where we need others. Because, you know, there always comes the time when you stop believing in yourself. When all you see is just more chaos and more barriers, and you think you just can't handle it anymore. That's when you need someone in your life who still sees that superhero survivor in you, who holds your hand, picks you up, continues that journey with you. And now if we think about these 3 elements, we can see that hope is actually something that you learn. You can learn it through adversities. And I think in some sense, you could say that chaos is actually the birthplace for hope, because if we want to become hopeful, we have to face adversities. It's those experiences of past difficulties, of resilience, of sisu. They are the building blocks for hope. I don't know if many of you have children, but if you have any, I think this is really important for you to understand and to remember, because the way you face adversities and disappointments actually predicts how your child will face the challenges in life. And for me, this has definitely been the best gift I've ever got from my parents. The gift of being hopeful. Now, I'd like you to think back into your life of those tough times and maybe give a thought about what have been the thoughts that have helped you to be hopeful. And what is the narrative of your life, of the story that you keep telling to yourself about yourself and your circumstances? Is it the story of hope and being hopeful? I'm going to end this with telling you a little story. It's about this farmer. You might have heard this because it keeps popping up, at least to me. But it's about a farmer, an old man whose horse ran away. And when the neighbors heard the news, they came to visit the farmer and said, "Oh, such bad fortune," they said. "Maybe," replied the farmer. Well, the following day, the horse returned with 3 other wild horses. The neighbor says, "Oh, you're such a lucky man. What a great fortune." The man replies, "Maybe." The next day, the farmer's son tries to ride one of these untamed horses and obviously falls and breaks his leg and starts limping. "Oh, such bad fortune," say the neighbors. "Maybe," says the farmer. And the following day, what happens is the army comes to the village to draft young, able-bodied men to the war zone. But as they see this farmer's son limping, they pass him by. "Oh, what great, great fortune," say the neighbors. "Maybe," replies the farmer. Now, the point of this story is that we never really know what is good luck and bad luck in life. Because, we cannot connect the dots in beforehand. It's only when we look back that we can see that something that at that moment seemed like the worst thing that can ever happen is the one that brings you to where you are today. And as soon as we remember this, that sometimes it's just our way of interpreting the situation or the circumstances, and maybe not the whole truth. When we realize that, and when we realize that we don't need to always react to the surroundings, we can sort of step back and give space for hope. You never know what life has in store for you. Bad luck can turn out to be good luck. And something unfortunate can be the fortuitous thing that you just didn't expect to have as an end result. Disappointment turns out to be a stroke of luck. But the acceptance of the circumstances gives you the time for this cognitive process of hope and create change out of chaos. Thank you.